with, we're going to do a continuation today of yesterday's class. So some of you might not have been a part of yesterday. We're doing the second part of a two-part class on a species of mushroom called King Stropharia. And I wanted to make it seemed like there was a whole lot of information. Mushrooms usually take a lot of explaining because they, a lot of times people don't know anything about them, and it's important to me that I give you all the proper information because there is so much of it, and some people are afraid of mushrooms, and I don't want people to be afraid, but I also want to make sure that I'm giving you good info so you have the ability to be informed and to know what you're looking at when you find things in the wild or if you're growing things on your own. So one of the things that I really love about this particular mushroom, King Stropharia, is that it's really easy to grow in a garden environment. And that's one of the things we talked about yesterday. So I'm going to start off, just for the few people who weren't a part of our class yesterday, I'm going to just open up a picture of what this looks like. And let's see, what's a good one? I showed this one yesterday, but I think it's a pretty good starting point. So there was a question, are they native to America? That's kind of a good question. It's an interesting question because we're not really sure, and it kind of depends on what you mean when you say native, because they are found here naturally. They're found where I am on the eastern United States. They're found naturally growing in the wild. In New Jersey and Pennsylvania, I have found them. I've foraged them in woods, but mostly kind of like the edges of woods, and sometimes like they're found in fields, actually more like sunny areas, not in the middle of the woods like a lot of other mushrooms. But they seem to be native to Europe. So they may have originally been found in Europe and then brought over here, but a long time ago. So there's some people who aren't sure if they're necessarily native to Europe or native to the US. But they do grow here really easily, really naturally, and they definitely don't cause any problems in ecosystems. In fact, they're really very useful in ecosystems. So this is a picture of these Stropharia mushrooms. I'll do a little whiteboard action so you can, once again, see how that is spelled. So the Latin name, like yesterday, Stropharia rugosoannulata. Common names, King Stropharia, Winecap, Godzilla mushroom, garden giant, and then some others, but those are the main ones. And let's see. So yesterday, I guess we can talk a little bit about identification, about like different, yesterday we talked a little bit about how to make sure you identify this mushroom properly. But I wanted to I found a good picture that I did not draw. Someone else drew this and I really like it. That shows you, oh, I lost you all. So many things open on my computer. There we go. So this is a great drawing that shows you the different parts of a mushroom, of, you know, your standard gilled mushrooms that grow out of the ground. So the cap of the Stropharia mushroom is often a dark red, or like a burgundy or a wine color. That's why they call it Winecap. When it comes out of the ground, when it's young, it's got that dark red color. It doesn't have any scales at all. So these things here, these little dots, sometimes you'll see those on various mushrooms. Winecap does not have any scales. It has a thing called an annulus, which is fairly uncommon for mushrooms. So this annulus is the reason why its name is Stropharia rugosoannulata. Annulata is annulus. So that's a way to think about that, to remember. It's this like piece of, I think I showed you yesterday. I'll show you this image from yesterday of what I'm speaking about. So are you all seeing the picture of the mushrooms now? Okay, cool. So this here is the annulus, so that we remember. It's like a piece of the underside of the mushroom cap that comes unattached or detached at the point when it opens up. So that's a really important thing to notice. And sometimes that ring falls off when it gets super mature. We have a couple things in the chat. Oh, weird. Are other people having trouble hearing me? Anyone? Okay, cool. So going back to this other here. So the stipe is another way for saying stem. So the stem of the Stropharia mushroom is like white when it first comes out of the ground, and then it turns like a yellowish tan. And then there's this thing called a vulva, which sometimes looks like an egg. And the Stropharia mushroom does not have one of these. This part of a mushroom, this vulva that looks like an egg, is something that is very, very commonly found on poisonous mushrooms. So if you see something that looks like an egg, or like a cup that a mushroom is growing out of, you want to I would say generally avoid those mushrooms, because a lot of times they're toxic or really potentially dangerous, especially if you eat them. But the Stropharia mushroom, this mushroom we're talking about, does not have that. And there are some mushrooms that sort of look like this Winecap mushroom. It does have some properties that are similar to other mushrooms you might find growing out of the grass or growing out of wood chips. But the easiest way to tell, which is what we ended our class talking about yesterday, was through the spores. So the spores of the mushroom, I'm going to go back to a picture that we ended with yesterday, and then we can talk a little bit about the spores. So the spore, Elliot, you have your hand up. Before I open up this picture, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, it's not really a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I know that some mushrooms can be not very good for you if you eat them raw.
That is true. Yeah, so I tell people when I'm teaching about mushrooms, especially like when you're early in the process of learning about identifying mushrooms and foraging mushrooms in the wild, especially, it's very important that we don't eat mushrooms raw. I personally think that we should never eat mushrooms raw, no matter what. And there are certain reasons for that. they're really pretty hard for our digestive systems to eat. It's hard to eat raw mushrooms. So I'm actually going to show you a different image first to help explain that a little bit. So yesterday we talked about the mycelium that makes up what mushrooms are pretty much entirely made of. The entirety of the organism that is a mushroom is, or that becomes a mushroom, is actually mycelium, and the vast majority of it, most of it, lives underground. So mycelium and then hypha are like the very individual strands. And then when we go all the way down to the cellular level of what mushrooms are, they have cell walls that are made up of chitin. So this chitin is the thing that gives the mushroom its like rigid, hard structure, what makes it so that it doesn't just act like a blob or like an amoeba. And that chitin is something that helps, so it helps to keep the shape of the mushroom, and it's also something that our bodies have trouble digesting when we eat them. So kind of like plants, like cellulose in the hard structure in cell walls of plants that we eat is also hard for our bodies to break down, because we're not cows and we don't have multiple stomachs, and it's there are certain things that are harder for us to break down. We can't eat wood. That's why mushrooms break down wood. But the chitin that's in the cell walls of mushrooms, we can't break down, and that's why we cook them, because cooking helps to start breaking down those cell walls. Another way that you could do, you could prepare mushrooms is putting raw mushrooms in like a pickling brine. You can pickle mushrooms, you can ferment mushrooms, and that's a cool idea too. And that's the reason that we do that, the reason that we ferment and that we pickle things, one of the reasons is because it starts to break down and pre-digest the foods that we eat. So going back to the spore print, because this is really important for identification, and I think it's like a cool art project. Even if you guys decide that you're not interested in ever eating mushrooms or really going much further with figuring out what they look like or what they are, if you're going to eat them or if you're going to make medicine with them or whatever, it's one of the ways that you can engage with mushrooms is through making spore prints. So we ended with this yesterday. And this here is a very basic spore print of a Stropharia mushroom. I'm going to close my window real fast because it's getting super windy and loud out there. Give me 1 second. Okay. So the easiest way to make a spore print, if you're just trying to see what color the spores are, is to cut a cap off of a mature mushroom. Like this is a mature Stropharia mushroom right here. And you put the cap face down on a piece of paper or on a paper towel, or maybe even like a piece of cardboard. It really doesn't matter if you're just looking to see. It's generally a white surface is best if you're trying to just see what color the spores are. And then you can generally up close see the color. So other sort of look-alike mushrooms to the Stropharia mushroom have different colored spores. These are like a dark gray or a dark purple or a dark, like almost black color. Other mushrooms that some people might think are Stropharia have brown spores or white spores. So if you see brown spores or white spores, you don't have the right mushroom. Let's see, we got something in the chat. Yeah, so spore prints, Liv asked, can spore prints help identify the mushroom? So absolutely. Spores are one of the main ways, like there are so many mushrooms. When you dive in really deeply to identifying mushrooms, it can get really difficult, really challenging. and some species of mushrooms that are so close together that look so similar, the only way to be able to tell the difference between them is to look at their spores under a microscope. So like it's like a super advanced foraging, super advanced mushroom identification involves like involves having a microscope, or at least having a really great magnifying glass. Yeah, Liv, do you have a follow-up question?
Have a certain pattern that helps you identify them, or is it color, or how does that help?
Yeah, so there's different things, and honestly, so I'm in the world of being a mushroom identifier. I am still probably pretty far away from being advanced. I'm like maybe intermediate, but it is such a vast world of learning that I consider myself kind of still at the beginning. But I can show you. Well, first I'm going to show you a picture of what the spores, a very, very up close photo of what Stropharia spores look like. So even the Stropharia spores are that like wine color, which is really interesting when they're all by themselves. And you can see them at this like super tiny level. So this here is like a ruler that's showing usually I think like a micrometer, or like, so millimeter, we all know what millimeters are, right? So micrometers are like far smaller than millimeters. That's how big these spores are. They're extremely tiny, and this is under a microscope. So this is a picture. There are some really wonderful websites that help to show, that go really in depth in detailing with photographs and explanations of how to identify mushrooms. And there's a lot of really technical words, really like it's a whole other language that you can dive into that even I wouldn't be able to explain to you super well, because I try to use language that's easy for everybody to understand. And if you're diving into the world of mushrooms, it's like you're it's very scientific, it's very technical, and it's pretty cool though. I mean, I'm really into it. I'm just not as qualified as some other people. Elliot, you have a question?
The other day I went looking for morels.
Yeah, cool. I think you told us you but you didn't find anything, right?
No. Oh, I already told you that.
I think you might have told us yesterday.
Oh.
I hope you find some. I still have never found any.
I go morel hunting every year, so.
Cool, that's awesome. I have never gone morel hunting. I have gone to one place that a friend of mine told me they found morels once, but I went with him and we didn't find anything. I wanted to show you also a little bit. So this is like an easier way of identifying just from the very beginning of, like I just said, it can get really complicated, but one of the simple ways, this is another thing that someone else drew, is to just see what the caps look like. These are different, to give you an example of the different kinds of words that people use to demonstrate or to explain what different cap shapes look like. There are all of these, and many people would probably say, well, convex and hemispherical and bell-shaped and flat, and like all of these kind of look the same, sort of, right? To people who aren't paying attention, there are a lot of people that would probably say, well, I mean, they all kind of look the same. I don't really see any difference between, this convex one and this flat one here. But if you dive in deeper, it actually does matter. So that's just one example. And this is, if you can remember these, learn these, it will help you a lot, just in, identifying at the very beginning. see, do we have other questions? I wanted to talk a little bit about the nutritional benefits, or maybe the wide-ranging medicinal benefits, the health benefits for our bodies of a lot of edible and medicinal mushrooms. Are people cool with that? Cool. Jaden, you have a question?
Yeah,
Oh.
we these mushrooms for our health, like immune disease problems, stuff like that, liver. I drink it every so often, but every time I do, I always end up puking it up.
Really?
I
Puking up
don't.
what? A mushroom?
Yes,
A mushroom
mushrooms.
tea?
Mhm.
Is it a
No
tea?
matter
Like
what.
something you add to water, or?
It's like powder, and then you put it in the tea or water, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
decide, and I always puke it up.
Whoa. Well, so that's interesting because some people do have like adverse reactions. Some people do have allergic reactions to mushrooms that are considered very safe for other people. It's just like, some people are allergic to peanuts and other people are like, oh, I eat peanut butter like it's my job. And our bodies are very different and respond to things really differently. I wonder if your reaction to just that one powder might even be the problem, as opposed to having some sort of allergy or something to those mushrooms in particular. It would be interesting to note, because they are super good for us. I've run into some people before who have told me that they're allergic to mushrooms, and I think that maybe they're allergic to like maybe one species, or maybe maybe they didn't cook them right, or that sort of thing. But it is really important to pay attention and be careful about that stuff.
Yeah, I also think it's about the chunks, like the small chunks. I'm sure
Yeah,
that has something to do with it. Maybe if it's stuck up in my smoothie, that I don't mind.
yeah,
If it's like in my smoothie, that I'm okay with. But
yeah,
yeah, in the liquid, I just puke it up.
that's interesting. I want to. Oh, before we get into, well, I guess we can do this, and then we can talk a little bit about some more cool garden stuff with this particular King Stropharia mushroom. But King Stropharia is really great in a lot of mushrooms have the same like things that make them up, that make up their whole beings, the whole organism. And that's why we talk about medicinal and health benefits kind of across a broad spectrum of edible mushrooms or medicinal mushrooms. I found this really great infographic that I'm just going to share with you all online. So, can you guys see as I'm scrolling? Does it look okay when I do this? Okay. So this is a great infographic I found online that tells how medicinal mushroom extracts work. So people would consider this Stropharia mushroom to be an edible mushroom, but maybe not necessarily a medicinal mushroom. And that's partially because there hasn't been a whole lot of scientific research dedicated to figuring out whether or not the Stropharia mushroom is medicinal. But there are some studies that have some like low level studies or introductory or beginning studies that have started that are showing potential for Stropharia to be medicinal in a lot of the same ways that our most common medicinal mushrooms like reishi and chaga and shiitake are considered medicinal, because they have very similar things. So I'm gonna go, okay, so if you have a medicinal mushroom extract in a powder or in a liquid form, they contain these things called beta glucans, and beta glucans are very complex sugars. And the very complex sugars, or like complex carbohydrates that are contained in medicinal mushrooms, are really, really great for our digestive systems and our immune systems. They are absorbed into our body just like other complex carbohydrates, and our immune cells react quickly to them, and then those immune cells basically work together with these complex carbohydrates to boost our immune systems in general, or to I should say to balance our immune systems, because sometimes people have immune systems that are like hyperactive, they're like working too hard, and that's not really good either. So these actually balance our immune systems. If they're underactive or they're overactive, it takes it to, it helps our medicinal mushroom sugars help to balance our immune systems and keep us overall healthy. So this says, sends out chemical signals recruiting an army of immune cells to strengthen and support our immune systems. The other, besides these beta glucans, these sugars that help our immune systems, medicinal mushrooms also have what are called triterpenoids, triterpenes. Terpenes are in lots of plants and lots of mushrooms, and these are something that we would get in mushroom tea if people put like reishi tea or that sort of thing. These triterpenoids are also really wonderful for our immune system, and they are anti-inflammatory as well. So, and this is some other things. They contain proteins, sterols, and lots of other nutrients, which are good for our overall health. And I'm gonna get out of here and see, there's something in the chat. Yeah. These are like super, so it's there's complex, the words are complex, right? Beta glucan, triterpenoid, ergosterol, like these are words that all might not mean anything to us, right? But they're generally doing simple things. They do things in our bodies. It's fairly easy to just understand, like, oh, these are broadly helping my immune system. These are broadly helping my respiratory system. These are broadly helping my nervous system. These are things that are really, really good for keeping me healthy, keeping my families healthy. And, they're a really great part of anybody's diet. No matter how old we are, no matter how healthy or unhealthy we are, these are just really great things to incorporate into our food and into our medicine and the tea that we drink and that sort of thing on a regular basis. And the Stropharia mushroom that we are specifically talking about has shown in some early scientific studies just recently that they are cancer fighting, they are anti-tumor, they are anti-inflammatory, they have antioxidants, they help to lower blood sugar in people with diabetes, and they help to lower cholesterol in people that have high cholesterol levels. So they're really great for a bunch of the same things that I just talked about that medicinal mushrooms are good for. But like I said, there isn't a whole lot of science that's backing that up yet. And there are more scientists who need to do a lot more research in order for us to be able to say with proof that that is true. But they're still really yummy. They have proteins in them that are good for us. They are often used as a meat substitute. They are low in cholesterol, or they have no cholesterol, they have no fat. They're really high in fiber, which is good for our digestive systems. And they're low in calories for people who need that. Although calories are good, we need them. And I want to talk a little bit more about, has anybody ever heard the word bioremediation? So bioremediation is a word that basically means using plants or using mushrooms to help to clean up soil or to help clean up water that's contaminated. that has like toxins in it, or maybe where an oil spill was or something like that. Stropharia mushrooms are really great bioremediators, and one of the things that they help to do is to clean up. Well, they help to filter things out of water that's running through our soil. Jaden, you have a question? Oh, I had to unmute you. Try again.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Would I be able to grow those Stropharia mushrooms here? Because it just hailed.
It just hailed. Would you be able to grow them, you mean like today, or would you be able to grow them in general at some point?
Just in general.
Yeah, I think that, well, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know exactly where you live. I don't know exactly how warm it gets, but my gut is telling me you probably could grow them. It might just be a little bit later in the year than I would be able to harvest them here. So a lot of times I harvest them in May usually, and sometimes again in September. So where you are, it is probably a little bit colder for longer. You might be able to grow them in your garden with all your other really awesome stuff, and just have those mushrooms fruit at a later point in the season. But I'm really not sure, because the mycelium maybe the mycelium can't handle how cold it gets where you live. And I don't really have the answer to that, but I bet you could probably find it with some of the mushroom nerds online probably could tell you the answer to that. And let's see. Oh, something super cool that I wanted to tell you about is that King Stropharia mushrooms, not only do they eat wood chips, not only do they like tear through the woody material and turn that into soil, but they also have the ability to eat nematodes. Have you guys ever heard that word, nematodes? So nematodes are like, they're extremely tiny organisms that live in the soil. Some of them are good, or they're not bad, but some of them are bad. Some of them like will destroy, they'll eat the roots of our garden plants, or they'll eat the roots of various things, and they cause diseases. They just kill off plants. And the nematodes that are considered parasitic, or that cause problems, these organisms that cause problems in our gardens, can they can wreak havoc and they can take over. So the King Stropharia mycelium actually can eat nematodes, which is crazy, and I didn't know that until today when I was doing research. It's something new that I wasn't aware of, and that's pretty cool. And I think I'm running out of time, and do you think I actually, do we have any other questions? Elijah, we're gonna run out of time, but
what can it do? Like the mushroom? Like what?
What do you mean? What can it do?
What is its main thing that it does?
In the soil or for our bodies?
For our bodies.
I would say they're really good for our immune systems. Yep. That's the most basic thing I can tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. I think tomorrow I'm gonna move on to a different species. I'm gonna do something different, but we will do more with mushrooms, with other species, and we'll keep like revisiting these themes. Okay? Cool. I will see you tomorrow, hopefully. All right, awesome. Bye, everybody.